The ESAT is coming up very soon, so in this video, I'm going to be going over all you need to know to prepare for and sit the ESAT. I'll be going over the most frequently asked questions, many of which I had when I was personally sitting the ESAT this time last year. So this includes what score is really good enough, what are the best resources to use to prepare for the ESAT, and also what the real test-taking experience is actually like. Oh, and I'll also go over some of the best tips and tricks and strategies that I picked up on when I was preparing for the ESAT myself. And these strategies helped me get an 8.9 in one of the sections, and also helped me get into Cambridge and Imperial. So I hope this will help you out too. Let's get into it. So what really is the ESAT? It's just an admissions test used by Cambridge and Imperial, and I believe UCL as well now. The subjects that you'll have to do will depend on obviously what course you're taking. So for engineering at Cambridge, which is what I applied for, I had to take Maths 1, Maths 2, and Physics. So this is the sections that I'll be covering mostly. But make sure to check the course website to see which sections you have to do. And I think for some courses like Design Engineering at Imperial, you probably only have to do 2 sections. But do make sure to go onto the website to check that. So each module contains 27 questions and 40 minutes to complete all of them. So if you divide it through, you get around 1:30 per question. Now this might sound quite tricky, and to be honest, it is. So I wouldn't go into the exam expecting to finish all the questions within the time. But by the way, you'll have to book the ESAT yourself, and I believe it's £70 if you're in the UK or Ireland and £130 elsewhere. But make sure you get that done so you don't miss your date. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the most common questions and misconceptions. So the ESAT is scored from 1 to 9 to 1 decimal place. So what sort of score is really good enough to get you a 9? So these scores are determined by grade boundaries, and this obviously will have some sort of variation from year on year. But for some sections, like Maths 1, the grade boundary will be higher than the other ones, like Maths 2, because of the difficulty levels. For reference, in the 2023 NSAA, which is one of the exams that the ESAT is the most similar to, you needed 20 out of 20 in Maths 1s just for a 9. So this would mean full marks in Maths 1. But for the physics section, let me just check, you needed 17 out of 20 for a 9, and 16 would still get you an 8.1. So you can see this difference in Maths 1 and physics, for example. So since the NSAA in 2023 was out of 20 questions, if we scale these grade boundaries up to 27 questions, you would still need around 26 to 27 just for a 9 in Maths 1. Whereas for physics, 23 out of 27 would probably be enough to get you a 9. Now, since Maths 2 is sort of a new section, as in NSAA and ENGA, there hasn't been a section purely based on advanced maths, we can only guess what the grade boundaries would be, since they didn't release them for my year as well. So 22 to 23 would probably be my guess for a 9. Now, some of these grade boundaries, especially for Maths 1, where you have to get almost full marks for a 9, may seem quite impossible, and it seems like the dreams of getting into Cambridge or Imperial are almost over. But that is very far from the truth, both from personal experience and from people I've talked to. A 9 is by no means a requirement to get in, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't even aim for it. Let me explain. What makes the ESAT hard is the time pressure you're put under. I'm sure you will have experienced it when you do your past papers and mocks. So these questions are by no means impossible. Well, hopefully. But what makes it very tricky is the 1 minute and 30-second time limit that you have for each question. So for example, in Maths 1, if you force yourself to try to do every question, so 27 out of 27, you would probably run out of time. This may not be the best idea, because if you get stuck on one question and you refuse to move on just because you want to be able to get every single question right, you may not get as high of a score as if you would have just skipped it. It might sound a bit confusing, but basically what I'm saying is that if you get stuck on one question, it is the best idea to move on as quickly as possible, knowing that you will sacrifice some marks, but over the long run, you'll still save a lot of time and it won't compromise your score. Strategically skipping questions that you get stuck on or that are especially hard is the best way to maximize your score. For example, in my ESAT, there was a trapezium rule question, and for some reason, I decided not to revise trapezium rules because I didn't think they'd come up. But surprise, surprise, when I opened the paper, there was a trapezium rule question, but I was thinking quickly, and once I saw that and I realized that I didn't know the formula especially well, I skipped it within about 10 to 15 seconds. so that I moved on. But this ended up saving me a lot of time, because if I had tried to do that question, I would have wasted a lot of time, which was well spent on the other ones. So what is a good score then? Well, here's an interesting statistic that I found from the Cambridge Freedom of Information. It turns out that almost every single home applicant in 2023 who averaged a 7.5 and above got it. Almost every single one. I'll link the data in the description so you can fact check me. But I believe 7 to 7.5 and above is already a really, really good score, and will leave you in a really good position for your interviews and so on. So personally, I also averaged just a little higher than 7.5 across my 3 sections. So I had 6.5, 7.2, and 8.9 in Maths 1, Physics, and Maths 2. And that was enough to get me in. Of course, you must remember that ESAT is only a part of the process. An interview will still play a very important part. But all in all, I'd say that aim for around a 7. And to be honest, a lot of applicants still get in, even with a score of even 4 or 5. So I wouldn't worry if you don't perform too well. So what is a test taking experience actually like? Well, for my test, it was at one of those Pearson test centers. And once you go in, you get a laminated sheet, A4 sheet of paper, and a whiteboard pen. It's sort of a marker. And they don't even let you erase your working, which I found quite frustrating. So make sure that you get as many of those laminated pieces of paper as you can. Running out of paper or space to do your working is the most frustrating thing. But yeah, try not to be too phased with the new environment and the laminated paper, and I hope it'll go well. Now for some tricks and strategies that I picked up on when I was preparing for my ESAT last year. So of course, I already mentioned strategically skipping questions that you find especially hard or that you get stuck on and you know you waste a lot of time on. But other than that, make sure you know your keyboard shortcuts for example, moving on to the next question, which I believe is N, and also flagging them. So yeah, if there's a question that you want to come back to, just press F and then press N to move on to the next one. So to be honest, this will probably save you like 2 milliseconds, but having to save time dragging your mouse all the way across to the bottom right and then dragging it all the way back down to the next question, I don't know, I found it quite useful. So here's another more technical tip when you're doing especially Maths 1 and Physics. Don't simplify too early on in the question. For example, if you have a number like 3 over 12 that you can obviously simplify to 1 over 4, don't jump to doing it just yet if you're in the middle of the question. Oftentimes, the question's designed so that these numbers will cancel out at the end. So what I mean is, this number 3 over 12, you may have to just multiply this by 12 in the next step of working. So if you would have just simplified it to 1 over 4, now you have to multiply by 12 again, it will sort of take an extra second or two to convert it back to 3. And a lot of times the simplification will be a lot more satisfying than that. So make sure when you do past papers, look out for this. Don't simplify your fractions too early and you'll see them nicely cancel out at the end. Some other techniques that you should be aware of is knowing when to complete the square, as that is one of the most overlooked strategies. This will be helpful in a lot of cases, even when there are other methods. Completing the square may be faster. One last thing is just something that you should really get good at, is making sure you can factorize quadratics really, really quickly, especially when it gets a little more complicated. Just making sure that you can factor them out really quickly and put them into factors. So now let's talk about past papers and what resources there actually are. So obviously you will all know about the NSAA and the ENGA, which in my opinion are the best resources to prepare for the ESAT. Once you finish all of those, I'm sure you'll be thirsting for more. So what else is there? Well, first of all, I think that before you do any past papers, it's a very, very good idea to read through the whole specification and to highlight the points that you may think you've not learned yet. There are some very, very sneaky topics in there that aren't covered by some GCSE boards. For example, there is specific latent heat, which I know a lot of people haven't learned in GCSE and may not cover in A-level just yet. So if you haven't learned specific latent heat in physics, make sure you get that covered. And there are also many other examples like that. One personal example is the trapezium rule, as I mentioned, and this is one of the topics that a lot of people don't even know is in the spec. Okay, so now you've read through the spec and you've completed most of the ENGA and NSAA papers, what else is there? Well, TMUA paper 1 is one of the best resources, as well as probably ECAA, which is the economics entrance exam that they used in the past. So if you didn't know about ECAA, make sure to look it up, because these two resources are some of the most useful ones when it came to preparing for Maths 2. And I'd probably say it helped me get that 8.9. There's also the BMAT, which will help with some conceptual stuff in physics, and also would just be good practice for Maths 1. So hopefully with all these combined, there'll be enough questions there to get you sorted. Some people ask about doing STEP to prepare for the ESAT, but to be honest, I think it's probably not necessary, as the question styles are quite different and they're testing completely different things. So I think that's all I have to cover for today, and I hope that you will do well on your ESAT. So thank you for watching and subscribe.